Welcome back. So today we're going to be talking about part 3, data visualization. So remember, there's kind of these 3 pieces of becoming a data scientist that you really should be working towards mastery in. So data organization, visualization, and data analysis. So just like with data organization and what's coming up in data analysis, we're dividing data visualization up into kind of 3 levels. So the first level is kind of the typical stuff that you're going to be seeing, again, using Excel, Power BI, where you're generating these sort of really kind of classical data presentations. So, you're talking about trending and histograms and trend lines and kind of this level that's, some pretty basic statistics plus, nice visual graphics that, most everybody can understand and has seen before. Ideally with all of these final types of presentations, the thing about them is you can make the most amazing graphic, but if it's something that somebody can't understand, it's really not very useful. And so just keep that in mind. So there's some really beautiful things that you can do with data visualization, and sometimes it does not make the science clear. So even though you really want kind of this artistic background with your data presentation, make sure that it's clearly illustrating what you needed to illustrate for your audience for the presentation side. So let's jump into level 1, data science, or data visualization, and then kind of talk about what that means. And then we'll move into kind of the level 2 and the level 3 stuff. And data visualization and data analysis kind of have this interesting jump that we'll talk about later in their level 3 stuff. And just to kind of give you a primer to what we'll talk about, there's this trend in data science to move away from kind of this classical statistics and kind of model-based approach to this machine learning approach. And both level 2 or level 3 stuff in visualization as well as in analysis, kind of we'll talk about that a little bit more and kind of why that trend's occurring and what it means. So, cool. So, again, visualization, kind of there's 2 pieces of visualization. First is you understanding the data, and then the second piece is explaining results to other people. And so that's kind of why in the hierarchy of events, we have organize the data and then visualize the data and then analyze the data, because you really want to understand what you're trying to do with your data prior to running an analysis on your data. So getting that data intuition is really key, and a really easy way to get initial data kind of understanding is to visualize it. So here's an example of visualization. So maybe you have a bunch of different data points, and they're kind of, they're just thousands of data points, and you don't know what they are. So there's some kind of trends in data science that you want to be able to predict behaviors based on some sort of dynamic of the data. And so a very common one that you hear about is like a normal distribution. And these are these nice bell-shaped curves that a lot of you have seen, so Gaussian distributions and that sort of thing. But with just looking at a data set, you have no idea if it's going to be fitting a Gaussian curve, or it might look like something like this, where you have these 2 separate humps. And so you want to be able to see that in some manner. So whether or not you can, or one of those people can just visualize it yourself, which is a very, very, very small percentage of us. But most of us need some sort of representation. So the histogram is a super common one. Basically, it says how many times did a certain event occur. So how many students got A's, B's, C's, or D's are kind of maybe some different bins that you might want to put something in. And actually in education, that's a very common thing, is to see these bimodal distributions where you have kind of one peak at one location, kind of the AB range, and another peak down at the DF range, at least in like the high school level. And there's a bunch of different reasons for that, but a lot of it's just student engagement and things that are going on in students' lives. So you get these interesting distributions. So you want to be able to see that. And so before you analyze your data, because you can't do all the same things if the data are not normally distributed, you can't run t-tests very easily. You can't do some of the things where you're saying, hey, this is 3 standard deviations away from the mean, so it's something that's probable to happen or not to happen. If you're 3 standard deviations away from the mean, it's 99% chance that it's not related to that mean, or is a pretty far outlier. So So understanding that is super important, and kind of knowing what your data look like and knowing what sort of tools you can use are absolutely critical. So the second piece is the more classical presentation sort of thing. So an example, there's some great tools out there right now. So Excel has continues to make amazing changes where you can basically say, hey, let's make a chart of X, Y, or Z, and it'll just do it for you and be like, okay, so this is a beautiful chart. I just pulled up Excel's chart maker, and just like this is just a screenshot of like the tutorial that they have on the beginning of it. So you can just do this stuff and it'll make these amazing, amazing charts. And we look at them and we can kind of understand what they're doing. But one thing I really want to caution people against as you become a data scientist is not to just blindly trust these tools, and you really want to understand what these tools are doing behind the scenes so that you can kind of understand and explain to somebody when you say, hey, I'm presenting this data, maybe you're trying to make some sort of decision for your company. You don't want to just be like, hey, this tool just spat out this really nice graphic for me, and here it is. You want to be able to explain what's going on behind there, and that'll allow you to kind of really manipulate that data. As I said, there's some great tools for this kind of level 1 stuff. So the ones that we'll be talking about through this course are Power BI and Excel. Tableau has some great things. Even some of the programming languages, Python has and R both have some great ways to visualize data. Use those. Those are some of the tools that you're going to be wanting to understand and be able to feel pretty comfortable with. But I really want to reemphasize this warning. Before you go and present any type of data, you really want to understand those tools that you're doing and use to get those data into presentable form, because there's nothing worse than going into presentation and grilling the presenter about their data because you see some sort of trend in there and them being like, oh, I don't really understand how I got this information, right? Like, you don't want to be that person as the presenter. Like, understand what's going on. So, but as a level 1 person, you really, taking this idea and like looking at your data and starting to get that data intuition. So like doing the pre-visualization and then understanding what you're doing as kind of your final presentation is absolutely critical. So level 2, in level 2, you're going to be taking data types that are a little bit different. So here's an example of just some node clustering. So basically this idea would be something like Facebook, right? So in Facebook, you have a bunch of friends, and maybe those friends have a certain amount of messages that they send back and forth. So they're going to be closely clustered to you because you're getting lots of messages from them. But there's a few friends out there that you have that maybe are further away. You maybe only send a message to once a month or once a year. They're still connected to you, but they have a lower weight in this particular instance. And so you can start generating these graphics that kind of represent that. And again, you want to be able to explain what these complicated relationships are in a way that, with a short explanation or a short sort of interaction with your end user, or even a written description for that graphic, they can understand too what you're trying to get across. And so the level 2 stuff is going to be taking data that are maybe not that kind of classical, automatically generated sort of formats from some of these other tools, but maybe some more complicated structures where you're being like, okay, I want to visualize this, maybe this 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional space, such that somebody else can understand it. And so it's kind of more on the analytical side of things. So you can really make some amazing graphics from, if you're kind of in that level 2 space. And these graphics are going to be kind of these design, decision just guiding graphics. So graphics that are going to be like, they really take the user, suck them in, and really give them, a good grip on some data that they might not have had a understanding of beforehand. This includes things like interactive designs, and of course, you're going to still want to know how to apply core analytical methods to these data. So that's kind of the level 2 structure. Again, Power BI and Excel do some of these things for you, but at this point, you're going to be moving into doing stuff with Python or D3.js or R. And I think in the future, it's going to be really interesting because these data sets are getting more complicated, and you're getting these multi-dimensional data sets. And what I mean by multi-dimensional is these are data that have a whole bunch of different types of columns. So every column in a data set you can think of as a dimension that you're going to look at, that you could investigate, right? You could compare, seat number in a car to car weight, right? Those are two dimensions that you could graph on an x and a y. And so, so anything that you can describe as an x and a y, you can consider a dimension. And so how do you visualize that when you have 500 things about a car in a way that kind of allows somebody to explore that information? So virtual reality, I think, is going to be an interesting tool that people are going to start to use, where you can kind of walk into your data and start to manipulate it. But we'll see. I mean, that's just my speculation. But I think that still fits into this kind of level 2 structure. So, and as I mentioned before, level 3 is kind of going to be a jump. And so right now we're kind of dealing with kind of these classical columnar sorts of data, where you're dealing with data sets that you can kind of make sense of. Level 3 of visualization is going to be kind of this ability to present architectures of experimental designs and how you're going to analyze the data. Because, as I said, data science is also bringing this huge component from machine learning. And machine learning, it's not always about kind of being able to visualize that data from the top down, because you're going to let the machine do a bunch of these experiments and hypotheses. And so you want to be able to tell your end user basically, how are you setting up those parameters for the machine to learn with? And so my view of level 3 data is basically being able to explain clearly what sort of manipulations you're going to let the computer do, such that it can analyze the data for you. Because then you can have a discussion about what those results are. So if you don't have a clear understanding of how you set up your system, and they don't have a clear understanding of how you set up your system, those results really aren't that meaningful, because you don't know how to communicate about them. Because you're like, well, yeah, it predicted what we expected to predict, and it's been really good. It has like an 85% or 95% accuracy rate, but I don't know how it got there, right? So again, you don't want to be that person. You don't want to be like, hey, this is working really well, but I have no idea how it works. So an example of this would be maybe talking about what the neural net would be that you're using. So neural nets are kind of a structure for allowing computers to make decisions. So in these input neurons, pretend that we're visualizing something. Let's say we're visualizing a spider. And so input neuron, that top one on the top left, might be the color black. Is it black? And so it's going to be, okay, so it's either black or not. So that's going to be either on or off. And then the next thing is it shiny? And that's going to be on or off. And the next thing might be, does it have 8 legs? And that's going to be on or off. And the next thing is it touching you? That's going to be on or off. And so those might be some of the inputs that are coming in. And then depending on what inputs are actually firing, those are going to hit these integration neurons and kind of make decisions based on that. So maybe it's black and shiny and has a red piece on it, or a red hourglass on it, but it's not on you. And so that might feed into the integration neurons 2 and 4. And those then send out information to these output neurons. Maybe you leave it alone, or you run away screaming. So depending on what it is, right? And so you kind of want to be able to describe how this decision-making process is going to occur, and then you're going to take a data set or data sample potentially and apply it and say, hey, every time somebody saw a black widow, they ran away screaming. Let's let the machine figure out how to figure that out. So that's kind of where I kind of see level 3 visualization. Like the data that comes back after you've machine learned something could certainly be in a format that you'd apply level 2 and level 1 techniques to, where you're basically saying, hey, these are the results. But to really have a conversation about those results, I think you really need to be able to clearly visualize and make visual graphics that understand and explain to your user and to yourself how your system's set up. And so again, because the majority of us have some visual learning component, I think this is an absolutely critical skill to have to kind of be that next level of visualization core member of a data scientist team. So, kind of the tools that you have for level 3 data, you want to be able to present things all the ways that you could do in level 2, but you also really want to be able to present machine architectures, and so and machine learning architectures. So that's kind of where I see level 3. So that completes our data visualization chapter. And next we're going to talk about data analysis. And in that chapter we'll talk about just how to deal with all these different pieces of data that we're getting in. we'll move on to kind of my view of how to become a data scientist and some of the paths that you can take to becoming a data scientist, and kind of reiterate kind of all the pieces that we've talked about today. And then lastly, we'll just kind of take some of this level 1 skill sets that we've been talking about and just apply it to an Excel or apply it in Excel using a CSV file. So I'm really excited to have you here, and hopefully you'll stick with us for the rest of this program. Thanks.